Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a new podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a cinematic classic. Every month we wish a happy birthday to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee, everything from a 20th to a 100th anniversary. I'm your host, Erik Martin, creator and moderator of the Cineverse Film Discussion Group that meets weekly in the Chicagoland area. This month we're commemorating the 60th anniversary of one of the most acclaimed and studied films of all time, Vertigo, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And like any good birthday party, we invite special guests to partake in the commemoration. For this episode, I'll be joined by one of the world's foremost Hitchcock film scholars, Dr. Drew Casper. He's professor of cinematic arts at the University of Southern California and the Alma and Alfred Hitchcock Endowed Chair. He's also the author of several books, including Vincent Minnelli and the Film Musical, The Style of Stanley Donen, and An Introduction to Film Reader. Additionally, he's contributed many DVD commentaries for vintage Hollywood films and has appeared in many making-of documentaries. Together, we'll talk about why Vertigo is worth celebrating all these years later, its cultural impact and legacy, what we can learn from the picture today, how it stood the test of time, and more. But first, a bit of background on this month's movie. According to Wikipedia, Vertigo is a 1958 American film noir psychological thriller film directed and produced by Alfred Hitchcock. The story was based on the 1954 novel From Among the Dead by Boileau Soujac. The screenplay was written by Alec Koppel and Samuel Taylor. The film stars James Stewart and Kim Novak and was shot on location in San Francisco, California, and at Paramount Studios in Hollywood. It's the first film to use the dolly zoom, an in-camera effect that distorts perspective to create disorientation. As a result of its use in the film, the effect is often referred to as the Vertigo effect. Vertigo received mixed reviews, actually, upon initial release, but is now often cited as possibly Hitchcock's greatest film and one of the defining works of his career. It replaced Citizen Kane as the best film ever made in the 2012 British Film Institute's Sight and Sound Critics Poll. Vertigo has appeared repeatedly in polls of the best films by the American Film Institute, including a 2007 ranking as the 9th greatest American movie of all time. Currently, Vertigo holds a 96% certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The film's original release date was May 9, 1958. It grossed over $7 million on a budget of $2.5 million. To set the scene for our discussion, here's the original trailer.
Vertigo, a feeling of dizziness, a swimming in the head. Figuratively, a state in which all things seem to be engulfed in a whirlpool of terror, as created by Alfred Hitchcock in the story that gives new meaning to the word suspense.
I don't want to die. There's someone inside me, and she says I must die. Scotty, don't let me go.
A beautiful girl haunted by the desperate, unexplainable urge to destroy herself. A man possessed by the paralyzing vertigo that made him afraid of high places.
Easy now.
Oh, no. Well, this is a cinch. Here, I look up. I look down. I look up. I look...
What was the strange attraction that brought these two together in spite of the dark forces that tore them apart? The specter from the past that drew her to the ancient headstone in the mission graveyard. The compulsion that drove her relentlessly to the point of no return. The story of a love so powerful it broke down all barriers between past and present, between life and death, between the golden girl in the dark tower and the tawdry redhead that he tried to remake in her image.
If I let you change me, will that do it? If I do what you tell me, will you love me?
Yes.
All right, then I'll do it. But I don't care any more about me.
Be aware that the discussion to follow is going to contain spoilers. The truth is, if you've not seen Vertigo by now, what are you waiting for? Stop right now and go watch the film and come back. All right, you back? Now it's my pleasure to welcome my guest, Dr. Drew Casper. Drew, when and where did you first see this film, and why is this movie important to you?
I saw the movie when it came out. I took a date, the Stanley Theater in Philadelphia, Friday night, and we had popcorn. The first thing that irritated me was they had a Casper cartoon. They always had a cartoon made by the studio that made the film. And of course, I was irritated more by the film because I couldn't figure out what was going on. I didn't know really what to make of it. And I remember going to reviews then. They didn't quite know what to make of the movie either. Just recently, in a couple of years, there was critics that all get together that vote for the greatest film ever made. I think they do it every 10 years.
Yes, you're talking about the Sight and Sound poll, which was most recently published in 2012, in which the 50-year champion at the top, Citizen Kane, was finally toppled by Vertigo.
It has been displaced by Vertigo. This semester, I'm teaching Hitchcock. Tonight is the first class at 6 o'clock. And of course, when I show Vertigo, there's such anticipation, and it's like being in a church at Mass. So it is a very revered film, and I always look forward to lecturing on it because it's such a one-of-a-kind film.
I first saw Vertigo in a college film studies class 30 years ago, and it absolutely blew me away, Drew. I mean, I could palpably feel the grief and obsession that the character of Scotty experienced, and I was quite taken with how Hitchcock mesmerized the viewer with long stretches of what he called pure cinema, with no dialogue, just masterfully framed shots of, for example, a man following a woman. I also remember on the first viewing the feeling of being manipulated and wanting to be manipulated, the sensation that even on some subconscious level, I was absorbing content and meaning that I may not be able to decipher until later.
You know, I do think Hitchcock is the master, not only master of suspense, but master of romance. I think he's our greatest filmmaker. And Vertigo is certainly, for me, one of the films that are right up there in his canon.
I would totally agree. So why is the movie worth celebrating all these years later? Why does it still matter, and how has it stood the test of time?
It matters because it's one of Hitch's greatest works. It's one where Hitchcock wears his heart on the sleeve. It's a very autobiographical film, just on a level of genre. It is spellbinding. It's exhilarating. I mean, it is on one hand a detective mystery thriller where you got two detectives. You got a professional detective, the Stewart character, and you have a lay professional, Barbara Bel Geddes, who is trying to figure out what's going on. It's a love story, a romance, one of the great romances, but a dark, dark romance filled with illicitness. I mean, it's a detective that's falling in love with the object of the investigation. It is full of foolish love. It is full of obsession. It is voyeuristic. It is also not only a detective mystery thriller and a love story, it's a horror film filled with ghosts and necrophilia and reincarnations in the past hovering over a present to such an extent that this past undermines the present, making it as insubstantial as the past. That's, it is a self-reflexive exercise in which Hitchcock is telling us, the audience, how an actor performs a part. And as I said, very autobiographical, with Hitch as the Jimmy Stewart character, Scotty, playing God, making Judy into his own image and likeness, controlling, and Hitchcock was in control. Unlike most of Hitchcock's work, except for Sabotage and I Confess and The Wrong Man, it's a dark work with very little of his characteristic humor. In fact, I think it is the darkest of all of his work. Why does it matter? An American movie in the 50s to have such darkness, such sophistication, it's amazing. But he didn't get away with it then. It didn't make money then. It's only after people began to study movies did the film come into its own, way ahead of its time.
Drew, in what ways do you think this film was influential on cinema and popular culture, or set trends in any way?
There's only one Vertigo. I mean, you could have 12 Monkeys, and you could have Body Double. You could have Obsession, that movie. I mean, they're rip-offs. They're certainly not influential. It was way ahead of its time. So does it contribute to the sophistication of American film audiences? Well, all of Hitchcock films does. When the French started to study Hitchcock and the Americans started to study Hitchcock, and we went back to Hitchcock. Influential in the sense that Hitchcock is influential. Influential in terms of scores. Here's his greatest score, I believe, Bernard Herrmann, and here's a film, that American movie, that uses more orchestration, more score than it uses dialogue. Is that influential? Well, I guess some people down the line did do that and did try that out, but it was done here first. Right. I mean, influential in terms of mixing genres, as it does so fluently and brilliantly. The use of colors, title design. People began to get into title design, and they saw this as an aesthetic element of a film.
I had a few thoughts. Let me rattle off some of these. I'm sure you're familiar with these, but of course, there's the Hitchcock famous forward zoom reverse tracking method. These shots were done with miniatures laid on their sides since it was impossible to do them vertically. And from what I understand, this effect has been replicated in other subsequent pictures, like Jaws, for example, that scene on the beach where Roy Scheider sees the shark attack. Another way this could have been influential was in its compositions and camera techniques, including numerous deep space camera shots used to create the illusion of depth and great stretching of distances. So, for example, you have the corridor shots in the Empire Hotel, the asylum, the alley adjacent to the floral shop, the driving scenes occurring down the San Francisco streets. The lens often tilts skyward to give the perspective of Scotty looking up at tall, phallic-like monuments like the trees of the bell tower or the mountains. And conversely, you have high angles also used in occasional scenes, such as the view from the top of the bell tower, the God's eye point of view just after Madeline's death. Additionally, there's a plethora of tracking shots implemented to create the phenomenon of Scotty stalking Madeline. So during the first half of Vertigo, from what I learned in the research, the camera pans from right to left and from left to right for the second half in an attempt to impart the feeling of Vertigo itself. Another thing that could have been influential, not necessarily innovative, but let's say memorable, the fact that the female lead is killed off, quote unquote, a little over halfway through the movie, kind of like how the heroine is offed halfway through Psycho just 2 years later. Also, the plot twist of Judy's reveal, which occurs 2/3 through the movie, long before Scotty learns about it, I believe is also noteworthy. So Hitchcock does this arguably so that we can build sympathy with Judy and identify with her character as we had developed an allegiance and sympathy with Scotty earlier. Hitchcock chooses to give the audience more information than his main protagonist, and I think that's a technique that helps build suspense. And in this way, Hitch chooses suspense over shock or surprise. And lastly, Drew, unlike previous Hitchcock films, there's not a happy ending or nicely resolved conclusion. There's no good guy or bad guy that emerges victorious. Maybe the only thing that emerges victorious is tragic fate.
Well, what I would say is what John Frankenheimer said. If anybody working in movies today, I think he said that in the 70s, that doesn't owe something to Hitchcock is full of beans. He didn't say beans. I'm not going to say what he said. He coined a vocabulary, particularly for the suspense thriller. And people have used this vocabulary since. Every time a suspense thriller is advertised, they try to put in the logo of the advertisement Hitchcockian. This bears the imprint of the master.
What's the moral to the story of Vertigo? What themes or messages are explored in this movie, Drew?
I don't know if there's a moral to Vertigo, or there's certainly a lot of themes. I don't think it's about love. I think it's about obsession. the self, Stewart, doesn't fall in love with the other. He falls in love with what he conceives of what the other should be. And that actually is a fabrication of his college buddy. Mm-hmm. It's a male fantasy. Stewart has bought into this male fantasy, not even a reality. And it's really more about where he is than where she is. Right. And of course, I think that's what he faces, the void at the end of the film. It's a very frightening thing. He's such a veiled man. In all of Hitchcock's work, he very well insisted upon the ambiguity of human beings, both good and evil, the same one and the same person. And here, what makes Vertigo special in his work is that the sides are loaded toward the negative for all of them. Of course, Gavin and Madge and the Kim Novak character, and of course the Jimmy Stewart character, which makes it very difficult for audiences to connect, because classic Hollywood cinema deals with a connection with character. That's what you're supposed to do. But he breaks that. How dare he? He sabotages that. One of the most important apparatuses of not only Hollywood classical cinema, but cinema in general, the connection, identification with character, he breaks it, pulls it out from under us. And that is very, very disturbing, as is the experimental narrative. This breaks with Hollywood classical cinema and the way people put films together, had put films together, like no other film has done that. Like the title or credit sequence. I mean, come on. Who is this woman? She's not Kim Novak. And where is she? And why is she so alarming? It's that color that he uses, the lips that are magenta. The skin is like a gray yellow. And all the spiraling that's going on. Then that opening sequence to establish setting and conflict. This doesn't. And what is this all about? This someone chasing somebody else off the, and then we finally see that this character, the Jimmy Stewart, the star, has let a policeman go. And then the jump, and this not only occurs between the opening sequence and the second sequence, where he's recuperating in Madge's apartment, he's riding up the steps, but there's so many breaks, so many intervals between scenes, so much not explained.
Right.
You're always going back into time is a problem here. You're always going back into the past, Although you're set in the present, you're going back into the past. There's the endless scene, as you so well said, of wandering around, scenes calling back upon themselves, ending where they begin, only to start up again. You know, there's no forward thrust as we have in classical cinema. We have 2/3 the film is over, the mystery is revealed. Not at the end of classical cinema. Where can you go from there? Right. But it starts up again. You have another third of the film. Also, I talked about identification. You're supposed to identify with someone. As the film goes on, you identify less and less and less with all of them. What's the meaning of the nun at the end? All of a sudden, the meaning at the end. Meaning should be precise, certainly at the end in classical Hollywood cinema. What is that meaning? The reassuring quality of classical cinema is just not there. It's quite disturbing. And we're left with a detective in the middle, in suspense. He's between this and that. What's he going to do? Is he going to jump? Was he going to have another nervous breakdown? You have no idea what he's going to do. Judy's dead. Gavin was let off. You don't see him being pursued for what he did. You know, we don't have that. The mystery is solved and he goes to jail. You don't have that, the punishment. Midge is nowhere around to offer her sympathy. She's always mothered him. She's nowhere around at the end. And then I said to have more music than dialogue. I mean, you want dialogue to explain things. You don't have that here. And then Hitchcock didn't care about logic. For example, there's no concrete explanations of how things happen. How did Scotty, for example, get down from the roof to which he's clinging to? Now, the thing that really bugs me, and I love it, he sees Madeline or Carlotta go into this hotel, okay, and sees her from the window, the top floor with the shade, so she's there. He goes in and he sees the female clerk at the hotel, and he says, well, there's no one that came by, and there's no one in that room, the front room. And he goes up, indeed, and no one is there. How did Judy get in without the clerk seeing her. How'd she get out? We don't really know about this relationship between Judy and Gavin at all. You know, it's never explained just what it is, but she's evidently, it's presumed she's a kept woman. And also her appearances and disappearance. It really is quite unnerving. And then the direct looking into the camera of Judy. You know, there's a Hollywood taboo. You don't look into the camera. What is she looking in the camera for? For our sympathy? So I think the way it's put together, it's just jarring, just unnerving. You know, I love it. I love the fact that I have to talk about it afterwards and bring it up. But he felt illogic, disturbed. It kept you in suspense. So he didn't really care about what he called kitchen sink logic. But the feelings are real. The feelings are what Stewart is going through,
yes,
and what he does. That's all very real and very vibrant and very, very human. And also her, the feelings that she got, particularly the hubris that she has. First of all, again, another thing, that's not Hitchcock. Everybody makes a confession. As he was a Catholic, Hitchcock, confession, you need this. You have to transfer the guilt. That's the beginning of salvation. And there is our Judy. She is going to write him. She has fallen in love with him, and she's going to write him a letter. She's going to confess, and she doesn't do it. She's going to play along. Not only one time with Gavin, she's going to play along with Scotty. Let him do to her, in a sense, what Gavin already did to her.
And I think, Drew, that this plays into another major theme here, which is guilt. A man's feelings of guilt over succumbing to vertigo, which contributes to the death of a police officer, and the guilt of losing the woman that he's obsessed with. Another prominent theme, voyeurism. That's a theme Hitchcock uses in many pictures, like Rear Window and Psycho, for example. Loss of equilibrium, both literally and figuratively, physically and spiritually, is another possible theme.
Yeah.
Debasing manipulation could be a theme here. The mask-like nature of appearances, evidenced by the eponymous woman's blank face in the opening credits that you alluded to there. The impossibility of forcing life to make you happy could be a theme. I think another strong one is the struggle for personal identity. Is Judy really Judy at the end? She alternates between speaking like Judy and Madeline as she's dragged up the bell tower, and she's increasingly engulfed in shadows, suggesting what? Maybe a loss of identity. Also, is Scotty himself any longer after Madeline has died 2/3 through the movie? He suffers a loss of identity throughout the picture. Consider also that both main characters have multiple names. So for Scotty, you've got John or Johnny or Scotty, and then there's Madeline and Judy. So there's a lot of playing with identities and monikers here. Other important messages in the picture. Impotence, sexual aberration. Scotty's vertigo serves as maybe a symbolic impotence that holds him back from catching up to Madeline in the bell tower. His injuries require him to wear an emasculating corset, and his fetishistic obsession with trying to remake Judy into his idealized vision of Madeline is sexually arousing to him.
Well,
It should be back from your face and pinned at the neck. I told her that. I told you that.
we tried it. It just didn't seem to suit me.
Please, Judy.
There's a real complex psychology at work here. So think about this. A man falls in love with a woman who doesn't exist, and then rejects the real woman who shatters his illusion, a woman who has unexpectedly fallen in love with the man she fooled. In this, too, she is fooled because in the end, the man prefers his fantasy over the flesh and blood actress standing before him. And with this choice, the man loses both women. Who do you think the film appealed to initially when it was released in 1958, and who do you think it appeals to today?
The picture was very disquieting. It didn't make the money that it was supposed to. Stewart was a big star. Kim Novak, even bigger than Stewart at this time. It didn't make the money back. So I don't know about the appeal. Today, I don't think anybody does not like Vertigo. And for many college students, it's the number one choice. And it used to be my favorite Hitchcock film. Now it's notorious.
Drew, what elements from this movie have aged well, and what elements are showing some wrinkles?
I have one problem with the movie. The casting of Stewart. He gives a magnificent performance, but he's too old for her. Stewart, by this time, under the aegis of Frank Capra and certainly Hitch, especially Hitch, he's become a neurasthenic. Not a little old lady, I don't mean that. Fussy, too fussy, too, things bother him too much. He's not virile. When he falls, and this man falls big time, you want a thud. This character needs more grounding. So when he falls, you hear the thud. Somebody like Robert Mitchum should have been cast opposite her.
Choice, yeah.
Because when Robert Mitchum is done in by a woman, like in Out of the Past, Where Danger Lies, he flops. Brando would have been terrific. Novak, on the other hand, is, as everybody else, Barbara Bel Geddes, is magnificent. Kim Novak can act. She's a presence, and that's what she's a sleepwalker on the screen. Gorgeous sleepwalker. Mesmerizing. And it works. Oh, it works in spades.
I agree that the age gap between James Stewart and Kim Novak, it's 25 years, stands out a bit more strongly to me as the years pass. But in a way, that large age gap makes Scotty's character all the creepier. So let's be honest here. This is not a healthy fixation or fantasy he's having about Madeline/Judy. And in the era of the Me Too movement, Scotty's attempt to control and fetishize Judy doesn't play very well. In recent years, I can't help but snicker a bit as well at all the gratuitous imbibing. Many a film noir has copious amounts of cigarette smoke, while Vertigo has copious amounts of alcohol indulging. But superseding all these issues, Drew, the masterful direction has aged very well, in my opinion. The compositions, editing, subjective camera, the camera angles and techniques, and the abrupt shock ending, they all acquit Hitchcock quite nicely.
Yes.
This is a birthday celebration after all, and birthdays are all about presents, except it's the fans who continue to get the gifts. Drew, what is this film's greatest gift to viewers?
I suppose it's a film that totally disturbs, totally renders you helpless, sends you into a kind of spin about what is going on. And as a result, the 2 hours that you spend with these people, the situation, and Hitch himself, his devilish talent, completely controls, completely absorbs, completely entertains you. You cannot think of anything else in your own life. When things disturb you, you want to have some kind of control. You want to know why, and you really can't get an understanding why. Well, it's this, no, it's that, it's that. And you're completely out of control. And I like to be out of control in the movie theater.
To be surprised, to be in the hands of a masterful director.
Yes.
I believe this film's greatest gift is that it's continually rewarding upon repeated viewings. There are so many themes and motifs to savor over. It also serves as a privileged and rare look into the soul of one of the world's greatest directors. He's a flawed man, of course, but he had vices and virtues, dark secrets, and enviable talents. An artist who was quite private to most, yet incredibly revealing in his art. What do you think about that?
He didn't talk much about himself and didn't reveal so much of himself. He revealed himself in his films. But in his films, there is the Hitch demon. There is the darkness. And of course, that he had this problem, this fear of being out of control and what to do. And here he makes a film about a man being out of control. And that's what he was all about. And he made his art from that. He did not go to a psychiatrist. He did not seek any kind of therapy. He did not take pills for this. He worked it all out in his art. Very autobiographical.
Drew, do you think this movie will still be widely watched and considered relevant in another 60 years?
I can't answer that. The way movies are going today, I'm not too hopeful. This whole emphasis on spectacle, as opposed to any kind of literary values, it spooks me out. I have no idea about this. And I don't even know where movies are going now. I've been teaching here at SC for so many, many, many years, and I've seen this become more and more the case. Hitchcock will get over 200 students, now. It used to get, when I started to first teach this, the class was packed, 350 in Norris Theater. Now, when I teach Lucas's The Star Wars Phenomenon, that's packed.
So it's hard to kind of get a barometer on where you think this will be in maybe another 60 years. But at very least, it's going to continue to be studied and talked about by those who care about movies. Would you agree?
If history of film, aesthetics of film, styles of film, genres of film are still the leading components of the study of film. But now film is moving into politics. You know, they come to film and they want to be social justice warriors. They don't want movies. They want to see all that went wrong. They want to change movies. It's sadly moved into a whole other area of politics, and I don't know where it's going to go.
Well, it took 50 years for it to displace Citizen Kane at the top of the Sight and Sound poll, so maybe it'll rest on its perch at the top for 50 years. Just in answer to this question, where do you think this film will be in 60 years? My opinion, I think it's going to continue to intrigue new audiences, at least those who care about movies. Even if they see through the plot twists, they can still get a kick out of looking for Hitchcock's cameo, trying to identify any MacGuffins in the film. And I think it's endlessly open to interpretation of its themes, its shock ending, Scotty's motivations in dark fantasies, Hitchcock's motivations in dark fantasies, for that matter. So I believe it will remain an evergreen film because it will always be an interesting movie. Like a work of abstract art, you can read into it what you will with many different subjective explanations, and that makes it fascinating. But your point about how contemporary audiences might be looking for something different, well, that gives me pause. So, Drew, tell us, what are you currently working on that listeners should know about?
I teach a course in postmodern Hollywood, films from 77 on, from Star Wars and Close Encounter that created this new period in filmmaking. And I'm putting together also a book about the 20th Century Fox musicals. I don't think they've been given their due.
And I'm curious, have you done any recent DVD or Blu-ray commentaries that we should be tuning in?
Well, I did the Marx Brothers. They came out with the Marx Brothers at Paramount.
Sure.
That was probably one of the last things I did. I used to do loads of these, and this kind of stopped. That has dried up.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, because I've always really enjoyed your commentaries on DVDs and Blu-rays. So many classic films that you provided commentary for, from Notorious to Lifeboat, a lot of the Hitchcock classics, and some other classics of the golden era of Hollywood as well. And I got to tell you that you were the first person that came to mind when I thought, well, who am I going to get who's an absolute world-renowned expert on Hitchcock and Vertigo? I thought of you first, so I'm absolutely thrilled that you agreed to this interview, and I thought it went really well. So I want to thank you again for being a guest on Cineversary.
Thank you, Erik. Bye-bye.
My thanks again to Dr. Drew Casper for agreeing to speak with me about Vertigo. Due to Dr. Casper's busy fall teaching schedule, we only had a limited time in which to talk, so I wasn't able to cover some other points about this film that I believe are important. So I'd like to review them with you now. First, I find it interesting that Vertigo plays into timeless myths and themes from literature and mythology. One of these myths is Orpheus. He's a musician who loses his wife, Eurydice, to death and goes into Hades to rescue her, only to lose her again. There's the story of Pygmalion, who crafts a sculpture of the perfect woman and then falls tragically in love with his creation. Another predecessor from literature is Tristan, who weds another woman named Isolde when the true Isolde of his passions marries another. And of course, Vertigo conjures up memories of Frankenstein, in which Dr. Frankenstein brings a dead man back to life, resulting in tragic results, just as Scotty tries to bring a dead woman back to life. In addition, the film employs interesting and noteworthy motifs and symbols. Motifs are repeated patterns in a movie. One of these is spirals or swirls, and you could see evidence of this in Madeline's hair, in the opening credits and dream sequence, and even in the steps up the bell tower. Also, the narrative structure of the film is a spiral in a way. You've got boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy meets girl, and boy loses girl again. Corridors and tunnels are further motifs. You have the bell tower staircase, the tunnel effect of Scotty looking down from the rooftop in the opening scene, Madeline's verbal recount of her dream walking down a long corridor, the open grave, the sanitarium corridor that Midge walks down, even the car ride back to the mission. Consider, too, the recurrence of flowers in Vertigo. You've got them in the flower shop scene, in the bouquet in the portrait, in Madeline's hands at the waterside, in Scotty's nightmare, and of course there's the flower he buys Judy. And of course, falling becomes a predominant motif in Vertigo. We see many characters literally plummet to their deaths or fall into a physical or mental danger in this movie. Next, it's worthwhile to examine the role that Midge plays in Scotty's love triangle and how she contrasts with Madeline or Judy. Note that Midge is grounded in reality, plainly and uninterestingly so, to Scotty. She's the opposite of Madeline. She's certainly not glamorous or mysterious or refined. And it doesn't matter that she's a steady positive influence on Scotty, or good to him, or good for him. She just does not fulfill his innermost desires. Vertigo is furthermore a picture replete with ironies. So as evidence, think about how Carlotta Valdez was thrown away. Elster throws Judy away when he no longer needs her too, right? At the moment that bookstore owner Pop Liebel sheds light on the eerie history of Carlotta and her tragedy, his shop grows visibly dark and foreboding. In the first half of the film, Scotty tries to wake Madeline up from her dreamy fantasy, hoping to break her from her trance. In the second half, Judy tries hard to wake Scotty up from his dreamy fantasy, hoping to break him from his trance, but acquiescing ultimately to his fantasy by agreeing to appear as Madeline. Now, the sexual politics at play in Vertigo also make for an intriguing evaluation, in my opinion. First, it's evident that males are the dominant controlling sex in the world of Vertigo, and in the case of Gavin, even some powerful males can manipulate other males. Gavin's power lies in negation and destruction. Not only has he murdered his wife and abandoned a lesser woman who loved him, Judy, but he has completely used and deceived an old crony in Scotty. Thus, Scotty is the victim of Elster's crime, as he is the victim of acrophobia, the very handicap that allows Gavin to frame him into becoming a witness for the wife's staged suicide. Judy is taken advantage of by Gavin, who even following her splendid performance of Madeline is jilted by him once the murder is successful. Likewise is she dominated by Scotty, who also demands that she resemble Madeline in his rejuvenation of an image. The real Madeline also is victimized by her husband's evil intent. Even the mythical Carlotta Valdez is reputed to have suffered a great ordeal at her husband's insensitive hand. Through Scotty's hidden pursuit of Madeline, we are given a classic example of acceptable voyeurism. What he's led to believe, like Judy, is that he has been hired to do a job, but in reality he's duped into spying on a very attractive female who will wholeheartedly win him over, through the brilliant disguise and performance, to this symbol of feminine perfection. Now, Kim Novak allures us, as she does Scotty, with her captivating sensuousness and immutable beauty. Because Madeline is so odd, yet so totally sensuous, and vulnerable to her own suicidal quirks and her fixation with Carlotta, Scotty is justified in spying since he is responsible for her, he says. He will inevitably protect her. His voyeurism suddenly doesn't appear so perverted in this light. The hidden but inherent evil within Judy as Madeline in Vertigo makes her a classic femme fatale. This is an overpowering, attractive woman who seduces men into danger, and so characteristic of the malevolent, sexy spider woman indicative of film noirs of the 1940s and 1950s. Noir blondes have traditionally been depicted as conceited, cold, and resistant to love and trust while remaining sexually vivacious. In Hitchcock's cosmology, blondes must be punished for their self-centeredness and emotional detachment, both to himself as the director and to the characters they portray in his films. It's also important to realize the extent of the director's invested self-revelation to his audience. Now, Hitchcock was notorious for obsessively coaching his actresses as pupils and for choosing attractive blondes to play his roles of women sexually repressed by their own sophistication. His goal on screen was to expose the erotic, carnal female hidden behind her formal attire and thus present the perfect physical representation of woman in film. At the heart of Vertigo is a complex and troubling paradox that is important to understand here. So in Vertigo, Scotty starts to fall in love with an image and proceeds to worship Madeline as a distinguished work of art. He reinforces this obsession when he tries to transform Judy into his everlasting model of the dead Madeline, a stimulus he needs to regain his desire. Now, this is something I was talking to Dr. Casper about earlier. Scotty is given a second chance in Judy to recreate his Madeline. In this, he rejects Judy, who wants to be loved for herself, to seek an ideal love that is totally connected to an image, and a dead image at that. Because Scotty is more intent on loving an effigy than a person, he has this image stripped from him at the film's conclusion. Judy, she lacks a strong personal identity, though she can play the part of Madeline to artistic perfection, right? In fact, her desire to please Scotty and resemble his artistic ideal is ultimately her downfall, you can make a case. She wears the necklace of Carlotta and is discovered. This is a reflection of Scotty's excessive aspiration to make art mirror life exactly and to control that image, though this fascination ultimately becomes his tragedy. He must bring Judy back to the tower, the scene of the crime, to relive the death of Madeline, and in so doing seals her fate and his own. Though she's always depicted as non-resistant, even overtly subservient to Scotty, Judy does respond to his affection. In the climactic scene when she's dragged to the top of the tower, remember how her legs appear rigid and lifeless, as if she were already dead. It's been argued, however, that Scotty's obsession is driven not by a subconscious necrophilia for this dead image, but rather by the fetishistic phenomenon of Pygmalionism, which occurs when a person is sexually stimulated by a picture or statue. These fixations are supposedly evoked through psychological imprinting at the height of sexual drive. Scotty surrenders to this attachment almost as masochistically as Judy submits to him. The fact that Judy fails to entice him points to this implied fetishistic need for the image of the dead Madeline as a catalyst to feel desire. This fetish could, furthermore, be masking a subconscious phobia of women. Moreover, this self-destructive fixation could represent Scotty's readiness to embrace, through a romantic erotic surrender, an alternative death to the real thing and to the burden of becoming his own self. Even her abstracted statuesque gaze and the non-diegetic music we hear associated with her character, consider, for example, Bernard Herrmann's Spanish arrangement and the tingling violin pieces that are played, even these conjure up references to Wagnerian lushness and classical art. Similarly, the mask-like visage of the anonymous woman of the film's title sequence echoes the artistic feminist thematic inferences of the film. With her stony features and static expression, Hitchcock has taken a living, sexual female and turned her into a cold, dead object of art, like Madeline. The camera, depicting only half of her face, zooms in on the lips and then the eyes, which dart left and right, suggesting fear and disorientation. And ultimately, we see a single glassy eye that pulls us into a black void where geometrical shapes and surreal patterns emerge. Just as the glossy eye of the woman in the opening credits draws us into Vertigo as though we were peering into a mirror and seeing the reflection of our own subconscious, so is Madeline the mirror image of Scotty himself. His obsession can thus be viewed in narcissistic terms, since Scotty is fascinated only by the reflection she offers of his own self. Consequently, it's easy to see how the two are paralleled. As aforementioned, they're both victims of manipulation by Elster and victims of manipulation by each other, and are hence innately masochistic. Conversely, they both exhibit sadistic qualities, as is evidenced by their cruel, selfish motives. So think about this. Scotty uses and abuses the real Judy, and she in turn allures him with her facade, knowingly leading him into a physical and psychological danger. But nevertheless, both characters are ultimately portrayed as tragic figures in their search for a meaningful, romantic, erotic union. In true patriarchal fashion, however, Scotty's misery is more poignantly depicted. He's worse off than having merely lost Madeline. He's even been deprived of her image upon the realization that she's a fraud. His hopeless obsession is both self-destructive and irrational, aggravating to his vertiginous symptoms. The death of Judy is utterly tragic as well, in that the loss of her ordinary reality is even more catastrophic than the loss of Madeline's ideality. Because Judy dies, the question of whether or not Scotty would have accepted her remains a mystery in this film. Scotty recognized a potential in Judy. "Judy, it's you, too," he says. "There's something in you." But the sentiment is only connected through her embodiment of Madeline, and that's important to remember. He can't even come to touch Judy, since it would bring him no closer to his idealized vision. The tragedy of Scotty and Judy relates to their desperate yearning for a romantic, erotic union that will redeem them and provide meaning to their lives. But these desires are blemished by the deceit present in their first meeting. They wander around aimlessly, experiencing guilt and anxiety, looking for a romantic illusion that will somehow accentuate their deficient identities. At the film's conclusion, when Judy sees the shadow she thinks is either the ghost of Madeline or a vision of death, she's completely confused, as if Scotty's vertigo, which he has now overcome, has been transferred to her. Hitchcock's oft-used transference of guilt theme is at work here. Scotty has thus defeated death by the end of the picture, and defeated his affliction through the sacrificial demise of Judy, a concession that guarantees the illusion of his own immortality. It takes the whole film for Scotty to overcome his acrophobia and his fear of death to reach the male-oriented, godlike solitude of the film's closing scene, which is a further commentary on the film's implicit dominance of man over woman and the preservation of patriarchal values. It's been suggested that the denouement tower scene links religion to sexuality, resulting in death. So I want to dissect this ending a little bit further, because several different conclusions can be made here. So in practical terms, you could make a simple case that Judy's fall is accidental. She's frightened by the emerging shadow of the nun, whom she thinks at that moment is the ghost of Madeline come back, and she steps away in terror only to lose her balance and fall from the edge of the bell tower. But Judy is arguably also losing her grip between reality and fantasy at this point. This conclusion also evokes a feeling of cosmic irony and poetic justice. It's ironic that Scotty conquers his fear of heights and vertigo symptoms, escapes from the shadow of the past, and acknowledges the truth of how he was deceived, just as the woman who embodied the girl of his dreams is destroyed. His victory comes, therefore, at a terrible price. And for Judy, falling to her death serves as poetic justice for playing a part in Scotty's earlier deception. Now, don't forget, this is still the censorship era of the production code. Judy did commit a crime, and the production code required her to pay for that crime by the end of the film. All right, a lot to digest there, I realize. I didn't want to overwhelm you there, but I did want to share some different insights and thoughts on Vertigo that I've thought about and written about over the years, as this is absolutely one of my favorites. So thanks for indulging me. All right, before we call it an episode, I wanted to give out my standing ovation for September. I highly recommend you read the book Alfred Hitchcock, A Life in Darkness by Patrick McGilligan. Among all the books on the master of suspense I've ever read, this one really tells the most complete and accurate story of the man, in my opinion, including his many flaws and talents. It's a riveting read that won't disappoint, so give it a shot. A second standing ovation this month goes to the Criterion Collection edition of Hitchcock's Rebecca, released on Blu-ray and DVD about a year ago and packed to the gills with special features, including a great commentary track with Leonard Leff and a wonderful doc on the author of Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier. Before we conclude, I want to encourage you to check out a website, cineversegroup.blogspot.com. That's the portal for my Cineverse film discussion group that I launched 13 years ago and which continues to meet weekly in the South suburban Chicagoland area. We're a democratic film society that watches and then discusses a predetermined movie that our members pick on a rotating basis. At cineversegroup.blogspot.com, and Cineverse is spelled Cineverse, you can hear podcast recordings of our group discussions and read more about the films we study. The reason I created Cineverse and this podcast you're listening to is to foster an appreciation for an intelligent dialogue about memorable films. To me, watching a movie is obviously fun. But even more satisfying is interpreting it, talking about it, sharing opinions and theories about a movie. I find the real pleasure is in digging deeper to learn how and why a film was made, the impact it's had on culture, society, and other movies, why that film has the power to evoke a strong emotional reaction in each of us, and what it can teach us today. We also have a Cineversary Podcast Facebook page at facebook.com/Cineversary Podcast. Now you can go there for more information on current or future episodes, post a comment or a suggestion there for a memorable movie about to celebrate a major anniversary maybe you think would be worthy of an episode of this podcast. And while you're there, hey, please like us on Facebook too. If you'd like to email me a comment or suggestion, you can get a hold of me, Erik Martin, at cineversegroup@gmail.com. And if you like this show, folks, please tell others about it and leave us good reviews on whatever platform you hear it from. We greatly appreciate it. Next month, I'll have the pleasure of welcoming multiple guests to my show to celebrate the 40th anniversary of John Carpenter's Halloween. I'll talk with Tommy Lee Wallace, the director of Halloween 3 and editor of the original Halloween movie, and Southern Utah University film professor Kyle Bishop, who's the author of How Zombies Conquered Popular Culture. You won't want to miss that episode. Prior to calling it a night, here's a quick shout out to Rocky Martin for performing the outro music to our show, which is a rendition of Waves of the Danube by composer Josef Ivanovich, better known in the 20th century as the Anniversary Waltz. This has been your humble host, Erik Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies, because they're not getting older, folks, they're getting better. Thanks again for tuning in to Cineversary.